Eventually, primitive cave boffins discovered new materials. Early man dropped rocks like a stone and got into metal, bronze and then iron. Iron Man was born. But this Iron Man didn't have superpowers like the Iron Man in films. He couldn't fly or tolerate Gwyneth Paltrow. So instead, he had to go to lengthy measures to defend himself. Luckily, cave boffins had also invented the iron spike. And shortly after inventing the spike, they invented stabbing each other. To make sure they stabbed the right people, Britons formed into primitive gangs called tribes. And like many gangs, they got into graffiti, vandalising the countryside with gigantic doodles, like this badly drawn horse, or this decorative pervert. Before Snapchat, hills were the most efficient way to distribute dick pics to a wide audience. As a result, this site at Cerne Abbas became the second crudest hill in British history, after Benny. People genuinely believed witches were amongst them, their fear fueled by leaked photos like this. There wasn't a clear-cut way of telling whether someone was a witch if they weren't wearing their pointy hat. So Britain appointed its first and only Witchfinder General. Matthew Hopkins devised a method to test if a woman was a witch. Hopkins' method was absolutely foolproof, which was handy because it had to be done by village idiots. The accused woman was lowered into water. If they floated, they were a witch and were killed. If they drowned, they were innocent and could go on living a normal life, underwater for 2 to 3 seconds. But the irrational world of witches and wizards was about to be blown away by the rational world of science and geniuses like Sir Isaac Newton. In 1665, Newton ran away from London because the plague was after him, so he came here, to Woolsthorpe Manor in Lincolnshire, a National Trust property that he was allowed to live in because he was famous. The story goes that an apple fell from this tree and landed on Newton's head. Despite his amazing hair, the force of the fruity blow caused several of his brain cells to rub together, and just like that, he invented gravity. Queen Victoria is often portrayed as old and grumpy. It's where the term Victoria Cross comes from, but she wasn't always a sour, disapproving old woman. She was once a sour, disapproving baby. Queen Victoria was born in 1819, in the usual way, out of a woman. It was hard to tell that this infant would grow up to be queen because her crown hadn't yet formed. It was just hair, which must have been a relief to her mother as she was pushing her out. As well as looking miserable, her other hobby was fashion. Even at an early age, she was dressing like a cross between a disillusioned Lord Mayor and an angry hen. In 1837, aged 18, Victoria became queen. Her reign was to be a period of great industrial, cultural, scientific and political change. But the main thing people asked her about was why she was still single and when she was getting married. Eventually, to shut everyone up, she fell in love with her cousin Albert. Prince Albert was German, but Victoria was willing to overlook that because they were in love, and because most of her family were German too. Their untrammelled sexual passion is evident in every photograph of them. The death of Queen Victoria reduced the number of women with a voice in British politics by 100%, because in 1901, women did not have the vote, even though at the time, half the men in Britain were women. Women were thought of as simple creatures who could give birth and raise families, but couldn't be trusted with something as complicated as drawing an X with a pencil. Today it's unthinkable that a woman wouldn't be able to vote, unless she was really hungover or in her slippers and it was raining. But back then it was the law. One woman decided that had to change. Emma Dale Pankhurst thought women could be more than just wives and mothers, so she deliberately only had 5 children, leaving her loads of time for politics. She founded the suffragette movement. These women were tough and prepared to fight, like Wonder Woman, but with sleeves. The suffragettes protested in creative ways. Some chained themselves to important buildings rather than the kitchen sink. Others went on hunger strike, kick-starting the food detox craze that continues to this day. One suffragette, Emily Davison, threw herself under a horse to get the vote, but the vote wasn't under a horse. It was in a little wooden booth in a primary school, but to be fair, women wouldn't have known that. The suffragettes wanted the vote so badly, they were prepared to die for it. Nobody knows why. Maybe they imagined it was better in here than it actually is. Maybe they thought there'd be games or sandwiches in here. If they'd known it was just a pencil on a shoelace, they might not have bothered. Eventually, women did get the vote after the next bit of history, but I can't skip past the next bit because the next bit is war, and men will find that interesting. The newcomers soon discovered life in Britain was very different to Jamaica. It was colder, wetter, we had potatoes instead of posh fruits. But they soon settled into a British way of life, not smiling and being permanently tired. Britain was becoming multicultural, although not everyone was happy. Not even racists, who at long last had someone new to hate, apart from Jews, Italians, Spaniards, women, the Irish, the French and the poor. Because far-right Facebook groups hadn't been invented yet, the only way racists could express their fury was to take part in race riots, which are sort of artisan pop-up festivals of hatred. Today, racist bigotry has no place in contemporary Britain, except Kent. But it wasn't just clothes that were changing. The sexual revolution was coming, and the country was lapping it up. Most of the change was due to this, the pill. A condom you could eat, a sort of get-out-of-child-free card that meant at last women could have sex for fun with any man of their choosing for 2 or 3 minutes, until he spaffed off, rolled over and went to sleep. Some women were having so much sex they decided to burn their bras because it was quicker than putting them on and taking them off all the time. Free love was all the rage. Thanks to the pill, sex was turned on its head, and its back, and over the table. People let it all hang out, like your dad doing the gardening in loose shorts. And the law was catching up with the times. For years, homosexuality was illegal, and gay men were sent to prison, where as punishment they'd have to share a tiny room with a man for years. Britain went overnight from grey to groovy. Suddenly it was cool to ignore society and just be whoever you wanted to be, as long as you had fashionable hair and flamboyant clothing like everyone else. People were angry, and all that pent-up fury had to go somewhere. Conditions were ripe for a musical explosion known as punk. As you can see from this searing performance, the punks were antisocial, cynical and dangerous.